If you want to sign up for the dinner on the grounds, head to the vestibule after worship. While this may make sense to you, many people would just think it sounded like a bunch of gobbledygook. This is because I used some insider language in that opening. Do your ministries use insider language? Does your church? Do you have creative or obscure names for some of your ministries that might leave people guessing? While it's natural for any group of connected people, especially communities, to create common language like names, terms, acronyms, and phrases, church communicators need to remember that not everyone is an insider.
Hey there, Church Communicator. Welcome to the Church Juice podcast, where we are energizing church communications one 20-minute episode at a time. Whatever your title or role is at your church, this show is designed to give you the communication and marketing tools, resources, and even community that you need to help you be successful. I'm Brian Haley, the producer of Church Juice. I'm joined as always by my incredible and awesome co-host, Jeanette Yates. Hey, Jeanette.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. And I have got to say that your opening was very Southern.
Yes.
That sounded like a very Southern thing. So representing your Jacksonville roots pretty well, I'd say.
That's right. Even Jacksonville people probably would be like, what is she like? Because it's really rural. That's really those two. Well, I think I threw in two insider words, but there might be even more. I don't know. Dinner on the grounds is something that we do here in the South. And my mom grew up doing on the farm in the country. And vestibule is another one. It's not really a Southern thing. It's just more of like a more traditional word. Yeah.
All right. Hey, before we dive into today's discussion, I have a quick favor to ask for you, watchers and listeners today. As you watch today's episode, I hope you find it encouraging and even challenging. Add a comment below and let us know that you are watching. And if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, because we are getting ready to release even more video-centric content to help you in your church communications role. So subscribing, turn on notifications, and that will help make sure that you don't miss any of that incredible church marketing content. All right, let's dive in to insider language. What do we mean when we say insider language? What are we talking about?
Well, as I was thinking about this and looking over our talking points for today, one of the things that we do talk about a lot here on Church Juice is the idea of building community and all those kind of things. And one of the elements of community is that you have language that means something to the people in the community that might not mean something to other things. So we're not saying it's bad to have insider language. As a matter of fact, that's a part of any community. You have nicknames for things, or you've come up with different terms for areas of your campus or whatever. And while that's not a bad thing, it depends on when and how you're using them, I think, is the most important things. But insider language is anything that somebody walking in off the street would not understand.
Yeah, and as communicators, we have to kind of toe the rope a little bit, right? Because you want to make sure that you're using common language where people understand, you might shorten a term to just an acronym, or, or just shorten words or whatever, or you might just have special names for ministries and things like that. And that's all good. Like you were just saying, like that's part of community, and it just makes communication quicker that way too, just using common language. But as communicators, we also have to think about people who are experiencing whatever communication for the first time, whether that's in service or email or, social media, whatever that is. And so we have to make sure that we're balancing that well, and make sure that for new people, they don't feel left out, they don't feel excluded, but you also want to make sure that you are using common language, but explaining it well, I suppose. Let's go through some common jargon that churches use.
So I love that we are starting with the idea of creative ministry names, because that is one of the things, you're like me probably, Brian, that we spend a lot of time in the church communications, different Facebook groups. It's the Church Juice Insiders group, which, speaking of that, like insiders, we have our Church Juice Insiders. But, and there's, always questions that show up every now and then that's like, we're starting a new ministry for young adults. What should we call it? Yeah. And then there's like some people throw in some things, church communicators. I'm just going to let you know that I too tried the creative name thing back in the day. So there is some insider language at our church. Our church sits on the point of two roads coming together. So we talk about church on the point, things like that. And so
Which is not the name of your church.
and it's not the name of my church. So then like I was starting a new ministry. And so I was trying to come up with and I can't even remember what it is right this second, which is probably another reason not to do it. But I decided that like the young adult ministry, the youth ministry was called Point Youth. So the young adult ministry needed to be called like Verge or something like that. I don't know, or Merge or whatever, I can't remember.
Yeah.
But like it was something that had to do with like 2 points coming together. And really all that did was make me have to explain what it was over and over again.
Right.
So while there may be times where you do need a creative name, chances are if you have a ministry and it's going to serve a certain population, community, group of people, just call it that thing. Men's ministry, young adult ministry, children's ministry. The end.
Yeah. Or kids or something that
Yeah.
explains what it is, right?
Right.
If you have to explain what you mean when you say, then it kind of defeats the purpose of the name itself.
Right.
So I would say 9.5 out of 10 times that we're creating names for anything, we should be looking at clarity over creativity. Be
right.
clear in the names that you use. Be clear in the ministry program location names. Always go for clarity over creation or creativity.
And depending on, the area where you are and who you are serving, even calling it ministry may not mean something
Yeah.
to somebody who's completely unchurched. If I've been in one church and I'm going to another and you call it a ministry, I'm going to know what you mean by that.
Yeah.
But if I'm a person that's new to faith, new to, coming into a faith community, I may not know what a ministry is
Yeah.
or what that entails, like how much commitment, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
Like, so maybe even depending on like I said, it may be the perfect thing to name it, but also consider who you're trying to reach or who you're trying to communicate with. Ministry may not even be enough of a descriptor for that. So
a lot of churches right now, post COVID, are seeing growth from church transfer, right? But if your church is reaching unchurched people, then that's something to think about. A few years when I was a communication director and outreach pastor in different roles, we changed from using the word ministries. I'm glad you brought that up. I totally forgot about this. But we knew that people had no idea what a ministry was. When you said the word ministries, it sounded like something from the government in a foreign country.
The prime minister.
So we started using communities because,
Right.
Community was something that we were centered on as a church. And so everything that we did was not a ministry. It was a community. It was kids community. It was
Or group.
Or
have youth
things
group.
like that. Yeah. So again, trying to think through from the lens of someone who has no exposure or doesn't know your church well, what do you need to explain differently? Or what should you be more clear on what you're doing? And I would say that extends into places in your building as well.
Yes.
Like you opened with vestibule or narthex is another one. Like
narthex is my favorite word. I love it. It sounds like a Dr. Seuss word.
Yeah. And it was, historically that was common language for parts of like a lobby essentially, but we don't use those words outside of church buildings anymore. So, so even in, things like that, you want to make sure that you're being super clear and being creative and calling, a lobby as something completely different where you have to explain what you mean or where it is. That's not helpful for new people. If you have those creative names, make sure that your signage points to that and make sure that you're clarifying it. But moving forward, try to be as clear as possible rather than creative.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like you just mentioned, like narthex, vestibule, those words, when they were popular, when they were being used all the time, were the common language.
Right.
So it's not like we're like, oh, we're just, that was the hip term back then for it, that's what thinking of it as like what makes the most sense for the people that we're serving, the people that enter our spaces, what makes the most sense for them. Now, if you have a big sign that is like narthex may be the right word in your context, like I know if some of my church, one of my churches, they're going to be listening to this and be like, she is talking about us. Listen, at that particular church, narthex makes sense. Okay. It does, but that's who they're reaching, who they're talking to.
Yeah,
so just pay attention to that. Now, I have another thing, and it's gonna kind of lead into our third things. So
Okay.
this is kind of a location and also our next one, which is acronyms.
Yeah.
So, one thing we like to do, we may not give a creative name for it, although some might argue fellowship hall or family life center
Yep.
don't really tell you what it is either. So, that's an example of like a creative name, but what is it? And then if you take family life center and you shorten it to FLC, which is not really an acronym, but it's like an abbreviation, then you're really double confusing
Yeah.
people. So, leading into that, so the idea of acronyms or shortening something, again, if it doesn't help people understand what it is or find it, it's probably not a good idea.
Another example of just building, do not mean this to be trashing on churches at all. It's just
No.
something that we experience, right? And I think if, as you're watching or listening, if you've visited other churches, I'm sure you've experienced this as well. So we're just trying to help you see, again, from kind of think through the eyes of someone new. But in my own church right now, we have a big lobby area that kind of connects two of our worship centers. We have two venues, and we call it the hub. Well, if you're a first time person, you have no idea what the hub is or where it is. You just know that you walked into this big open room, right? So anytime we talk about it, we have to explain what it is or where it is, and then we can refer to the hub. So when we talk about things that have a unique name, we need to clarify what we're talking about the first time that we talk about it. And if you're using an acronym, a lot of ministries shorten their names to just an acronym. Women of the Word, or I said YAM, Young Adult Ministry, or things like that. WOW and YAM mean nothing for a
Right.
first time visitor. So make sure that you write out what you're talking about if you use acronyms so that you are including everybody and not leaving anyone out.
Well, and there's also something to be said too, because like you were saying, we're not trying to, we all use insider language, we all
Yeah,
use all these,
right.
but like it depends on what your communication piece. Remember, in one of our previous episodes, we talked about different having a variety of communication platforms and channels, and you're communicating different things.
Yeah,
If you're communicating to your insiders, you say we're having this in the hub. If you're communicating out to the wider population, you might say in the lobby or whatever,
right,
like there. So it's not like get rid of all of your insider language. It's just when you're communicating,
right.
see who your audience is. And so I think that's probably the real answer. I was thinking too, this is kind of back to the original one, like the creative ministry names. When we joined our church like 20 years ago, the men's Bible study group was called the Baxter Boys, named after a theologian or somebody. I should know this. I hope my pastor doesn't. But anyway, and it's like, yeah, your husband should be part of the Baxter Boys. And like, of course, us being from the 80s and the 90s, we're like, is that a boy band? Like, who is that? What is going on? And so then they had to explain it and all this kind of stuff. Well, now, of course, it's called men's group or something more descriptive. But those people that have been in that group 20 years, they're
Right.
they're they're the Baxter Boys. You know what I mean? So they're still using that language with themselves and with each other, but it's not something that we're putting in the bulletin or sending out, in an email, because who knows what the Baxter Boys are.
So, as communicators, we need to think like a first timer. So, one of the ways that you can do that is to really kind of take yourself out of what you're doing for a moment. Think through, intentionally think through every element of your weekend services or your communication flow, and think through, okay, as a person who has no experience to our church, what am I missing? Or what am I not communicating clearly? So one way that you can do that I love doing periodically is just experience a Sunday as a first timer. So think through, as I show up on the property, what's the first thing that I see? What am I missing? What do I not know? Or what do I need to know that I don't have that information for? Or what is assumed that shouldn't be? Then you go into the lobby or the main entrance, and think through again. Do I know where to go? Do I know how to find things as a first time visitor? Are people connecting with me to help me find these things? What's in the bulletin? Do I know what a bulletin is or where to find that? And then, go through all the way through the service to the exit, to the follow up, and think through, if I have no exposure to church, if this is my first time, what does that look like? Or what am I missing?
Yeah, and sometimes it may be worth the explanation, especially if it's a word in the Christian context that means a lot. So, like, fellowship may not mean, somebody
Yeah,
may be like, "Ooh, Lord of the Rings." But in the concept of, you know, your faith community, fellowship means more than just it's not quite just hanging out. It's
yeah.
not quite a Bible study, but there is a fellowship of believers. It may be worth doing some instruction on that, which I think is perfectly appropriate as well. But just plan on doing that. Yeah.
Well, and that's a good example. Fellowship has a lot of different meanings. So my church actually has fellowship in the name of the church. And a conversation I had with someone in new to the community a few years ago, new to the like city a few years ago, thought it was an academic fellowship. Like you know what I mean?
Okay.
Like
Yeah, like a teaching fellow or
yeah,
yeah.
they thought
Mhm.
it was like a community kind of academic fellowship. They didn't know because there was no church in the name essentially. And so just making sure that we are being super clear from a variety of perspectives. That's a good point. Even like I mentioned, like the term bulletin, like outside of church, I don't know. Well, you used to get like news bulletins, right? So maybe that's where it comes from. I've never really
Yeah,
actually
it's
thought
kind
about
of
it.
like I did look it up because I was like, this is fascinating to me. I love words. I was an
Yeah.
English major, everyone. Uh,
Yep.
and so, yes, essentially, it goes even before like news bulletins, but this idea of something that is, breaking news or a public board where there's notices, that's like the bulletin, which brings me to like, how big does a bulletin have to be if it's supposed to be just like basically bullet points?
Hmm.
But that's another episode of
Yeah.
Church News Podcast. But yes, this idea of like bulletin when it was being used along with vestibule and narthex was
Yeah.
probably a term that everybody understood, the news bulletin, like you said.
Yeah.
Now, program, worship guide,
Yeah. Depending
those
how you
things
use
make,
it too.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Ours is your weekly planner.
Yeah, another way that you can think through kind of with fresh eyes is to talk with first-time visitors, see what their experience has been, and they may have great insights. They may also not really know what they don't know. So those are things that you can just, talk to people as you build those relationships. If you have good relationships with other church communicators in your community or in your area, be a secret shopper or ask someone to be a secret shopper at your church. You can experience each other's church services or communication, or however you do that. Ask each other to do that with the first time perspective, and make sure that you guys are thinking considerately for first time people. Another area that we need to explain, I guess, sometimes what we mean when we say are a few terms that revolve around our role as church communicators.
Yes.
And so one of those is branding. A lot of times we associate branding to the logo, right? Which the logo is part of it, but really branding is so much more than that.
Again, I had to look this up because, we all kind of walk around like, yeah, we know branding, marketing, all these things. And then it's like, wait, I have to tell other people I have to explain this. So I wanted to make sure that I had like an easy way because you could go down
Mm,
rabbit holes of what it
yeah,
is and what it isn't. But the easiest thing for me is the branding is who you are, like, and it tells the story of who you are. So your logo, your name, your colors should all evoke some sort of idea of who you are as a
yeah,
community.
yeah.
The marketing piece is going to be how you build awareness of that brand.
Yeah, I would even go a step further and say that branding is even more than just how you're presenting yourself. Branding is actually how people perceive you. Um,
Yes, good point.
so, and we talk about that. I mean, we bring these topics up every
Yes.
so often because they're great reminders and things that we forget about or take, like insider language. They are things that we talk about and we kind of just make the assumption that everybody knows what we're talking about. But branding is really, it is what people in the community, what people outside your organization or people even part of your organization, what do they think about your organization, your brand? What do they think about you? That
Right.
is branding.
So if you're a brand manager, you're
Right.
trying to manage that well and make sure that what you think your brand is and what is being perceived are matching. That's a really good point because I think a lot of churches say, I've heard this, especially like recently in our area, a church will say, we're
Mm.
a XYZ church. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, but is that the perception that you have in the community right now? And so
Right.
like, and so that's something really important to think about. And that's
Yeah.
another way you can bring somebody in and ask, like, one of the things when you're asking people, like, how did you hear about us?
Mhm.
They might say, well, I heard you had a really great kids program.
Mhm.
Well, part of your brand
Yeah.
is probably that you are,
Absolutely.
you're a church for families with young children. Yeah.
And so your logo, your colors, the words that you use, that all plays into that.
Right.
And that's where they tie together. Another term that I think is often misunderstood is marketing itself, just marketing. I was at a conference recently, and Seth Godin, who is I don't even know how to describe him. He's like the
A thought
king
leader.
of, yeah, a thought leader. He's like the king of marketing essentially. But he made the comment recently that really struck me, and I think helped provide clarity on, for me, what marketing actually is. And essentially he said that you can really call anything marketing or communication, if you don't like the word marketing, but you can really call anything marketing, because marketing is really all about relationship. It's about connecting with people. And that's really what we're doing. We're not selling something. We're not really trying to convince somebody to do selling, to buy something or to be a part of something. That's advertising. But marketing or communication is about connection. And it's about communicating and connecting well with people and building those relationships. That's something that I think we need to just, kind of refresh the way that we think about our role as church communicators. And so I hope that's a little bit helpful as you watch or listen today.
I think sometimes, we are all, we're in the church communication space. We're in the church marketing space. So we don't, necessarily, it doesn't necessarily ruffle our feathers because we're doing it. We know what it is. We know the heart behind it. We understand that marketing, especially church marketing, is just sharing what God is doing in and through the life of our community. And that is a wonderful thing. Sometimes people think of it as like it's part of evangelism, right? Because we're spreading awareness of the gospel in some way. So, but, sometimes when you say you're in church marketing, or like if you're running, if you run an ad for a church service and then you might see some troll, I don't want to call somebody a troll, but that's what I mean. I don't know. They'll say something like you're, pushing, that's not, we know that's not what it is, but sometimes, that's what people say, but the truth. We all know the truth. Marketing is not a bad word, but if you don't like it, it's communication. It's community, it's outreach, it's building connection. That's right.
All right, well, that is a wrap on today's show. If you have something to add, again, add a comment below. We would love to hear from you. And if you would like to know more or follow up, you can find all of the links to Church Juice and everything that we've talked about today in the video description below. If you haven't already, again, please subscribe, turn on notifications. That way you won't miss any future episodes.
On behalf of Church Juice and everyone at Reframe Ministries, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.